Welcome back to the deep dive. We are shifting gears a bit today. Usually we look at these broad global trends, massive economies, but today we're focusing our lens on a specific singular coordinate.
A very specific one.
We're looking at a strip of land the size of New Jersey, roughly 23,200 square kilometers,
Right.
that somehow manages to be the landlord for the world's most powerful militaries.
It's the ultimate case study, really, in the idea that geography is destiny.
We are talking about Djibouti, and for this deep dive, we're treating this session as, well, a special intelligence brief.
Right.
We've pulled the economic data, the human rights reports, and the security assessments to answer one central question. How did this tiny nation become the geostrategic giant of the Horn of Africa?
It's a great question because, on paper, Djibouti shouldn't be a global player. It has very few natural resources, an incredibly harsh climate,
Right.
and a population of just over 1 million people as of the 2024 census. Yet, if you want to understand modern power dynamics, not just in Africa, but globally, you have to look here.
And I want to be clear about our mission today. We aren't just doing a travelogue. We need to unpack how Djibouti balances the interests of the U.S., China, France, Japan, and Italy all at the same time.
Yes.
We need to look at it not as a passive parking lot for foreign navies, but as an active strategic player.
That is the key shift in perspective we need to take. We have to see Djibouti as an African state that has, well, shrewdly monetized its stability.
In a very unstable neighborhood.
Exactly. A neighborhood that is historically very combustible. You have conflict in Yemen, instability in Somalia, complex politics in Ethiopia. Djibouti's primary export isn't goods. It's the guarantee that we are the safe zone.
Okay, so let's start with the executive overview. Why does this specific patch of desert matter so much to Washington, Beijing, and Paris?
Well, it really comes down to that old real estate mantra. Location, location, location.
Right.
If you look at the map, Djibouti sits at the southern entrance to the Red Sea, directly on the el-Mandeb Strait.
And we should probably define that for everyone right away, because it's the core of the country's value. This is what's known in military and trade circles as a choke point.
Correct. Bab el-Mandeb, it translates from Arabic to the Gate of Tears. It connects the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden and the Indian Ocean.
So it's the bottleneck for the Suez Canal.
It is. If you're shipping goods from Asia to Europe or oil from the Gulf to the West, you absolutely have to pass Djibouti.
I was looking at the maritime traffic data. It's millions of barrels of oil and billions of dollars in cargo passing through there daily.
Daily.
If that strait closes, the global economy basically has a heart attack.
Precisely. And that explains the why. Now look at the who. Because the stakes are so high, everyone wants an insurance policy.
Cool.
The list of tenants is staggering.
You have the United States, France, China, Japan, Italy, all hosting military bases.
All of them.
It's the only place on Earth where the American and Chinese militaries are stationed just a few miles apart.
Just a few miles. That proximity is wild when you think about the current geopolitical climate.
It's essentially a barracks for the world.
And we'll get into the tension of that later. But it brings us to the second pillar of their relevance. It's not just about the sea, it's about the land behind them.
You called it the lung for Ethiopia.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. Ethiopia is a demographic giant, over 100 million people, a rapidly growing economy, but it's landlocked.
No coast.
It has no coast. So they need a door. Djibouti is that door.
And it handles almost all of their traffic.
About 95% of Ethiopia's maritime traffic. The port of Dorley and the container terminals are the economic engines, linked by the Addis Ababa-Djibouti Railway, which went electric in 2018.
So if Djibouti shuts the door.
Ethiopia suffocates. So Djibouti leverages its position between the sea and the hinterland.
Okay, so we've established the external leverage. Let's pivot to the internal machinery. Who is actually pulling the levers inside the country? Let's get into the politics and governance.
For the last quarter century, the central figure has been President Ismail Omar Guelleh. He's been in power since 1999.
And he didn't just appear out of nowhere. He took over from his uncle, Hassan Gould Abdidan,
Who was the country's first president.
after independence from France in '77. So, despite the label of republic, we're looking at something that functions a lot like a dynastic succession.
Functionally, yes. Technically, Djibouti is a multi-party republic. But in practice, it's a dominant party state run by the People's Rally for Progress, the RPP.
And the international ratings reflect that.
They do. Freedom House ranked it not
Yeah.
free way back in 2011, and the Economist Democracy Index rated it authoritarian in 2024.
Now, politics in the Horn of Africa is rarely just about ideology. It's so often about identity, about community.
Right.
We need to break down the ethnic dynamics here because that defines the internal friction the government has to manage.
There are two main groups you need to know to understand the country. The Somalis, specifically the Isa clan, and the Afar.
And the demographic breakdown is something like 60-35.
Roughly 60% Somali and 35% Afar. And the power structure, well, it mirrors that split, but unevenly. The president is Isa. Traditionally, the prime minister is Afar.
It's a design balancing act.
It is, meant to keep the peace. But history shows it hasn't always worked.
The sources mention a civil war in the 90s, which I think gets overlooked when people talk about Djibouti's perfect stability.
It does. And it was a significant conflict. From 1991 to 2001, it was fought between the government and the FRUD, the Front for the Restoration of Unity and Democracy, which was largely an Afar rebel group.
You felt marginalized.
Deeply. They felt marginalized by the Isa-dominated administration, and, they took up arms.
It ended with a power-sharing agreement, but looking at the current administration, the Isa clan, and specifically the president's inner circle, still seems to hold the executive reins pretty tight.
And that control extends to civil liberties. The state owns the main newspaper, Law Nation, and the broadcaster, RTD.
I saw the 2019 U.S. State Department report.
Right, it flags issues with arbitrary detention and corruption.
Yeah.
It's a stability that is enforced from the top down rather than emerging organically from a robust democracy.
Which brings us to the financial model. You used a term in our pre-brief, rentier state. I want to drill down on that because it explains the economy perfectly.
A rentier state derives all or a substantial portion of its national revenues from the rent of, indigenous resources to external clients.
Usually oil.
Usually we're talking about oil. But in Djibouti's case, they aren't renting out resources, they're renting out strategic geography.
I was looking at the numbers on the base leases, and they are fascinating. The U.S. pays about $63 million a year for Camp Lemonnier.
Right. France and Japan, about $30 million each. China, around $20 million.
And that adds up fast.
It does. In 2017, those military rents alone accounted for more than 5% of the country's GDP. That's passive income on a national scale.
It allows the state to generate revenue without really having to tax its citizens heavily or build up a complex industrial base.
Exactly. But the service economy goes beyond the military. The data shows services are nearly 80% of GDP.
It's almost entirely a logistics and service hub.
Because they don't produce much.
Yeah.
They facilitate. Whether it's Ethiopian coffee going out or Chinese consumer goods coming in, Djibouti takes a cut. They're the toll booth operator of the Horn.
But there is some potential for actual resource development. We have to talk about the salt.
Lake Assal. It's the lowest point on the African continent.
And there's an industry there.
There is, a salt industry. But more interestingly, the geology offers a solution to their energy problem.
Geothermal.
Yes. Djibouti sits on the Afar Triangle. This is a geologic hotspot where the Earth is literally ripping apart.
3 tectonic plates.
The African-Nubian plate, the African-Somali plate, and the Arabian plate are all pulling away from each other. That friction, that thinning of the crust, creates massive heat. The potential for geothermal is huge.
And if they can tap that, they could reduce their reliance on imported fuel and electricity from Ethiopia.
Which would be critical. That energy independence is key.
Yeah.
Because despite all this cash flowing in from the superpowers, the domestic situation is stark.
We'll get to the human costs in a moment, but I want to stay on the security aspect. You called it the eye of the storm.
It's an apt metaphor. Look at the borders again.
So-
To the south, Somalia, decades of civil war, terrorism from groups like al-Shabaab.
Right.
Across the water, Yemen is in a brutal conflict. To the north, Eritrea was isolated for a long time. Djibouti manages to stay out of the direct line of fire.
But it absorbs the fallout.
It has to. It's a major migration hub. You have refugees fleeing Yemen and Somalia, but you also have economic migrants from Ethiopia trying to get to the Gulf states for work.
A transit lounge for the desperate.
It is. And watching over this chaotic flow of humanity are the most sophisticated militaries on Earth.
Let's talk about that tension. Camp Lemonnier is the only permanent U.S. base in Africa. Crucial launch pad for counterterrorism operations.
Absolutely.
But the big headline recently is China.
This is China's first overseas military base. It fundamentally changed the game. It's signaled China's intent to project power globally, protecting its maritime Silk Road.
And it's not exactly a friendly neighborhood barbecue over there. There have been reports, accusations from the U.S. about lasers.
Yes, that Chinese personnel targeted American aircraft with lasers. It's great power competition playing out in the sandbox.
So you have the U.S. trying to maintain hegemony and fight terror.
China trying to secure trade routes and expand influence, and France trying to maintain its post-colonial status. Their defense treaty was renewed in 2011. It's a very crowded house.
It is. I want to pause the geopolitics for a second and look at the people living in the shadow of these bases. What is the cultural fabric of Djibouti?
It's a nation of poets. I love this aspect of the region.
The oral tradition.
Both the Somali and Ahar cultures have deep oral traditions. The Gabe is the Somali epic poem form. It's not just art, it's political communication. It's how history is preserved, how grievances are aired.
And in terms of daily life, you can't ignore khat.
No, it is the rhythm of the day. Khat is a mild stimulant leaf, chewed socially, usually in the afternoons.
And it has to be imported.
Most of it, yes, which is a drain on foreign currency. But it anchors the social structure, business deals, political discussions. It often happens over khat.
Visually, it's a very traditional society. Men often wear the makawis, which is like a sarong.
Yeah, and women wear the drak, a long, loose dress suited for the heat.
Yeah.
Religiously, it's about 94% Muslim, predominantly Sunni.
And tolerant, for the most part.
Generally, yes, but we have to be honest about the social pressures. Conversion from Islam is rare and can lead to, significant ostracization.
There is one statistic in the human rights section that just stops you in your tracks.
I know which one you mean.
It's regarding women's health and rights, and I think it's important we address it.
The prevalence of female genital mutilation, or FGM.
Yes. The data indicates 93.1% of women and girls have undergone FGM. That's one of the highest rates in the world.
It is. And here is the complexity we see so often in the region. The government legally prohibited it in 1994. There are laws on the books. But this is where deep-seated cultural tradition clashes with state legislation. It's practiced by women within the community, often seen as a rite of passage. It is a massive human rights challenge that legal bans alone haven't solved.
It's a sobering reminder that strategic stability on a map doesn't necessarily mean social progress in the home.
No, that rentier money doesn't always trickle down to fix these deep social issues.
Okay, I want to step back into our educator mode for a moment. We've thrown around some heavy terms. Let's just synthesize them for a second. We talked about the choke point.
To recap, a choke point is a strategic narrow route. el-Mandeb is the definition of this. Control the choke point, you control the flow of energy and goods. Simple as that.
Then we have strategic rent.
That's the business model. Djibouti doesn't sell products, it sells its address. It leases its territory to foreign powers. That's strategic rent. An economy based on geopolitical value, not productivity.
And the third one, which we touched on with the geothermal potential, the geologic tripoint.
Right, this is the science nerd factor. The African-Nubian, African-Somali, and Arabian tectonic plates all meet here.
They're pulling away from each other.
Exactly. That's what created the Afar Triangle. It's why the earth is hot there, why they have salt lakes like Lake Assal, and why the landscape looks so alien.
So looking forward, what's the outlook? We saw a mention in the sources of something called the Bridge of the Horns.
It sounds like science fiction.
It does.
It's a proposed project to build a massive bridge across the Red Sea, physically linking Djibouti to Yemen.
But given the war in Yemen, I assume that's on hold?
Indefinitely. But it shows the ambition. The leadership views Djibouti not just as a port, but as a continental connector.
So what's the realistic outlook?
A continued pivot to infrastructure. You'll see more Chinese investment in ports, free trade zones, logistics.
And politically?
The trend line suggests stability will be prioritized over democratization. The U.S., France, China, they want their bases secure. They want the shipping lanes open. They're unlikely to push hard for democratic reform if they fear it might lead to the kind of chaos we see in Somalia or Yemen.
So the status quo is profitable for the global powers and the local elites?
Precisely. They value the certainty of the current regime over the uncertainty of democratic change.
This brings us to the final analysis. How do we sum up this Djibouti paradox?
It's a masterclass in leverage. A country with almost no resources has made itself indispensable. It plays the U.S. against China, manages a delicate ethnic balance, and holds the lifeline for Ethiopia.
It punches way above its weight class.
It really does. But there's a crack in the foundation.
And what's that?
That's the provocative thought I want to leave with.
Djibouti is a rich state in terms of strategic capital, but it has poor citizens. We're talking about high unemployment, extreme inequality.
And that electricity statistic. Sources citing that 45% of the population lacks electricity. And you have to wonder, how long can a government sustain that dynamic selling stability to the world while inequality festers at home before the internal pressure becomes too great?
That's the question.
That is the question that should keep the landlords and the tenants awake at night.
A fascinating look at a small place with a massive footprint. That's it for this deep dive intelligence brief. Thanks for listening.